All right, I'm heading back to a town called Valparaiso, known in short as Valpo. But yes, I've been there before. I get my hair cut as I need to right now, every 3 weeks. So I sort of have a built-in timer that I hit these same 3 places every time I go out there. So that allows me time to let these stores restock. I've got Goodwill, a thrift store, and another place called Valpo Vintage. So that's another tip. Have a regular place that you stop at over and over, but give it time to restock. Once a month would be perfect, but if you do something regularly, like get your hair cut, make that part of your stop, either before or after your haircut. So that's what we're gonna do today. But first, a quick stop at Costco for the $1.50 hot dog meal. Man, I can't go into a record store hungry. Come on.
Oh, I get over here. Well, mine's not working then.
All right, beautiful fall day. I got my haircut in the books. I'm gonna head over to the Goodwill in a place called New Creation and see if by chance they got any old 45s for me. If not, I'll go to Vintage Valpo, which is my little route every time I get my haircut. So let's see what we got in store and we'll go from there. And we're pulling into a place called New Creation Men's Center, and it's basically now over this way. Yeah, I don't see any 45s.
I'm a 45 collector, there's no doubt about it. But I am not going to let a stack of albums go by without giving it a quick flip through. For gosh sake, there could be a vintage Beatles Rubber Soul in there, and that would be the day that I missed it. And you remember a few episodes ago, I found the African folk art album in this exact bin for 75 cents, and I sold it for $200. So I always flip through and do my due diligence. I figured it's the price you got to pay to be a collector. You don't want to skip past a stack of LPs like this. The cassettes, not so much, but I gave them a quick glance.
Well, nothing there. So we'll go back in the car and we'll head across the street to the Salvation Army, and hopefully I'll be able to score something over there. All right, let's try this again. This time, Goodwill. Give it a shot. Oh, excuse me. Different layout this time. Looks like they move everything in the back. All right, don't see any records. Here they are.
Right away, I can see a children's album, and I can see that these albums are beat to hell. They're backwards. They're all, flipping, flopping around on me. Some of them don't even have jackets on them. The rest of them are 50s era show tunes, some classical, some religious. Nothing really is jumping out at me, but once again, you're going to have days like this where you just don't get anything. So we're on stop number 2. I was a bust at stop number 1, and I'm going to go through them. And one day I found a stack of about 25 classic rock era LPs in here in perfect condition. I got the cars, I got the sticks, I got all the good stuff from the 80s. And someone had just dropped them off that day, and I stopped there on that day. So they go quick. And what remains behind, I'm convinced these are the leftovers from somebody who inherited a collection, brought it into a record store. Then the record store guy brought all the show tunes, all the Jackie Gleason. Oh, here's that Bud Pressner label. If you remember, I found that test pressing. I really like this because it's Gary, Indiana. And this guy recorded some obscure stuff. But back to the LPs. Here we go. I'm glad I had that Costco hot dog. You don't want to do this on an empty stomach. You got to learn to read upside down. You got to be fast. Otherwise you just waste valuable time. I'm already getting the sense that I'm not going to find anything here, but that's okay. I'm going to be back here in 3 weeks when I get my haircut again. And maybe that's the week that someone drops off a bunch of Beatles 45s. Who knows? But I always look, and you never know what you're going to find. I'm swinging through this fast. I'm about done, but I can already tell it's not looking good. Someone's been here before me. I remember these records from last time I was in here. But like I said, you got to do due diligence, and there's going to be days where you're just not going to find anything. But you're going to come back, you're going to hit it again, and that may be the day. So, the old treasure hunters used to say, today is the day. And that's the way you got to think. Today is the day you're going to find the rare vintage LP or 45 that you were looking for. So if you're going to be like Mel Fisher, the world's most famous treasure hunter, he always said, today's the day.
And no luck there either. So this is the way it goes, hit or miss. So I'm not going to buy a bunch of old scratched up LPs. Most of them were like show tunes and religious. So let's go to Valpo Vintage. All right, we're on Lincoln Way, which runs all the way from San Francisco to New York City. And it's named after President Lincoln. It was the first national road, actually, to go across the United States. And here we are, Valpo Vintage. Let's give it a shot. All right, last time I was in here, they had a lot of soul. Let's see if they updated it.
If you're running short on time or patience, go right to the B section of the album section. And sure enough, Beach Boys, Beatles, Bob Seger. Now, I'm not a snob when it comes to condition. Remember, a good record plays without skipping. And if you turn your volume up loud enough, you won't hear the hiss and the crackle. And a lot of times you're holding a place for a very good with your good or good plus record. So the condition is the only problem I have here, but I know darn well, I've been in here 3 or 4 times, they're going to make it worth my while on checkout. So I'm not getting collector quality mint put on a shelf records that you worship, but I'm finding some gems, and these are like soul, and I might find a northern soul. So it's definitely worth my while to go through these one by one. I just read a book about Stax Records, so I'm on a sort of a Stax Records. I know that they have the Volt subsidiary. Motown is referenced in just about every other page of this book because, Motown, Stax, and Atlantic, they were all bouncing off of each other, and heavy competition back in the early 60s, late 50s, well into the 70s. So you see these names pop up, and you think, wow, yeah, that I remember that reading right out of the book. There's Rare Earth Motown, an obscure Motown subsidiary label. There's a VJ. You got some Elektra. So this collection here is more, I would say, soul R&B. They didn't pull this out of a farm neighborhood down in Rensselaer. This came out of Chicago or Gary or Hammond. Maybe Whiting would be my best bet, but it's just a pure guess. You love the fact that they're in these little collector boxes with the lids, the pro packs or whatever they're called, platter packs. I got about 6 or 8 of these 9, and they're pretty cool. Once in a while, you can ask if they won't do a deal for you. You can say, well, will you throw the box in? And a lot of them will say, yeah, So it's sort of a cool thing to get these vintage boxes, and some people collect those just by themselves. So never be afraid to ask for a discount. The worst thing they can do is say no. And if they say no, they say no. You just roll with it. But what are you looking for with these? You're looking for matching sleeves. Chances are, if you have original Atco record with an Atco sleeve, then it didn't go far. Picture sleeves, of course. And you're looking for stuff you don't have in your collection. You have to have, in my opinion, a photographic memory, or at least a feel of what you're looking at and if you have it or not. If you were to pull out Discogs or a phone and try to thumb through it to see if you had each of these records, you would be in there for hours. I would rather miss one, and I have missed many. And the lesson there is don't be afraid to make a mistake and miss a record. You can always go back. And in my case, I'm filming everything. A lot of times I can go back and see what I missed, or a viewer will point it out. I've had that happen several times already. Go back and get this record. And I do that. So I'm liking the labels here. I got a lot of Atcos. I got a load of Motown. We had that Rare Earth label. I'm pulling some sort of 70s soul, like Earth, Wind, and Fire. I got a Steely Dan. I got some Fleetwood Mac. And so that's sort of cool, too. Look at this one. Lord, what a cool looking label. That Brenda and the Tabulations. And I'm quite sure they got some soul, possibly even a Northern Soul hit. I've got a new list going, a Northern Soul in alphabetical order. So on future digs, I'm going to have that right there, especially in record stores that already have A to Z. So I'll work the list from A to Z. And that's really the best way to do it. A list from A to Z, and then a record store sorted from A to Z. Now you're going to pay higher prices. So right here, I know darn well, condition, I'm probably going to get some goods, good pluses, very goods, but I'll get a handful of very goods out of here. But price, I always do really well here. I think her name's Emily. Sometimes she has to pick up the phone, call the owner, but they usually say yeah. And I feature them in the videos. There's another Atco. Once again, a lot of good soul on Atco coasters show up there, and sort of a lot of Otis Reddings. And you say, well, I thought Otis Redding was Stax. Yeah, he was, but a lot of times they would use Atco for distribution, and the second, third, or fourth pressing would be on Atco because they had a farther reach. They were a subsidiary of Atlantic Records, and they had better distribution than Stax did, at least in the early days. So that's why I'm doing that. So all these different soul gems are coming out of, and probably had the best luck at Valpo Vintage finding them. And so a lot of them will be placeholders, but that means you keep it until you get a better one. And, Chess right there. And even if you don't know who the artist is on Chess, it's such an iconic label that you want to just sort of pick it up as a placeholder, even if it's not in the greatest condition. Now, if you've been collecting for 20 years and you have all this and you have everything very good plus, or you never buy anything besides mint, that's a whole different idea. And it just depends on where you're starting. You might be starting collecting right now, or you might be doing it for 2 years, or you could be doing it for 20 years. But the thrill of the hunt is what it's all about. Verve is always cool, very jazzy. You find a lot of smaller numbered pressings, I would say. Verve is something you would always want to give a close look, at least, if not pick it up and figure it out. When you go home, I say if you enter everything into Discogs, if you doubled your value, you won. If you tripled or quadrupled your value, you did really good. You might have one record that's a $50 record in here. And let's say I know how much I spent because I'm doing this voiceover, but let's say you spend $20 and you have one record that's worth 50. Do the math. It's not very hard to figure out. So this actual box that I'm looking at right now, I have one that's exactly the same color, and it's pretty cool. So they must have sold millions of these too. Another thing about boxes, it suggests that this was a collection that so there's some curating. Look at that right there, Flashback, Harlem Nocturne. So that's going in the stack. But when you're looking through stuff that's in these little boxes, it suggests that someone was a collector, even if it was just a teeny bopper, someone bothered to buy the box, put them in the box, keep them in the box, and they may have sat there and aged for 30 or 40 or 50 years in someone's attic before the estate sale happened. Somebody died, and these guys go in and they buy everything up at the estate sale. So that's how that works. And there's the original Atlantic label. You're very familiar. Aretha's on Atlantic. Once again, the Atco is a subsidiary of Atlantic. So that's what you're looking for, labels. And once you get past your initial impulse to buy all of the bubblegum songs that you had when you were a kid, and you get that out of your system, you're going to be bold enough to buy artists that you're not necessarily familiar with, but you know that they have a strong collector's following, like a Cannonball Adderley or a Sun Record, even though it's an artist you haven't heard of. So you'll get confidence in buying artists that are sort of off the beaten path, or not necessarily in your wheelhouse, but you'll go home and you listen to them, you start becoming familiar with them. And you start listening to maybe some of their stuff on Spotify, or you start going on, I love like Channel 73 on Sirius XM, Smoky Soul Town. And then I think you pop up to 74, you got 60s on 6, they used to call it, but that's the 60s channel. 75 is the blues channel, and then you go back to 72 on Sirius XM, and that's the 50s, the doo-wop. So between those 4 channels, I literally am cruising down the road listening to a lot of these songs, and I Shazam it, memorize it, and I've got a running list of what I heard. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how many times have I just listened to a song, pulled into a record store, or I'm going through a dustbin of records at a thrift store like this, and I'm like, oh my God, I just heard that song. So you sort of imprint on your neurology, you follow it in your memory banks, and then boom, there it is, right in your hand. So that's the cool thing about hunting for records. You pick up stuff all the time that you just heard for the first time, or it's just been filed away since you were 10 years old and your dad played it when you were riding your hobby horse. So that's the beauty of collecting. You know, you can go from your childhood memory. There's a nostalgia to it. There's a deep-seated part of our brain that locks in on these recorded sounds. I don't think Edison had any idea when he was creating the phonograph how intense the connection to music would become in recorded forms of music. You can have Spotify playlists all night long, but you can't pick up a song and put it on a turntable that's on Spotify. And you can't hold it in your hand. You can't sell it. Look at that. Stacks. That's when they switched. There's the old stacks there, the blue. So about 68, they switched over to the finger snap. And here we go. Let's go up front and check out. All right, when checking out, be patient, be polite. Browse around if they need time to add everything up. But don't be afraid to ask for a deal.
A little bit of a deal. So anything you could do would be greatly appreciated. And I have featured you twice, and up to 250,000 views on RockMine. So you're becoming a regular.
So we got 18, $1.99 a piece. I could do $1 a piece. Half off.
And then you got that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so for the total would be what?
Let's see. $25.63 with tax.
Can you do 20?
I can ask. I'm
Okay.
not supposed to do more than that.
a lot of these are pretty rough condition-wise.
He said yes.
Okay, cool.
2140.
All right, Valpo Vintage. You wouldn't think it would have good records, but I tell you what, I got some good soul out of there. She cut me a pretty good deal. I'm gonna call it a day and head back to the ranch. Mission accomplished. All right, Valparaiso. Let's see what we got in our bag of tricks. I always get good stuff. I stopped at my usual flea market, or what we call new creations. I stopped at Goodwill. I got blank, so I made my last stop. As I was saying, I got skunked at New Creations and at the Goodwill in Valpo. So I made my last stop, and sure enough, Vintage Valpo, I think, came through. So let's see what we got. Got a stack of 45s, and I got an LP, a mystery LP that I'll go over at the end. So that's always cool, right? So how much did I pay for all of this? Start off with that, $21. So I talked to, I think her name's Emily. I've talked to her several times, and she's always been good and always been fair. So you know I pick up good stuff when I see it. We'll go over that LP last. But I've been on a big Memphis kick, and I've been reading this book about Stax Records. So right there, we're going to get into the old Stax catalog. How's that showing up? Right about there. Looks pretty good. So you got Otis, and Atco was Atlantic Records. So they had a deal with Atco to distribute a lot of their stuff. So this is Stax, probably recorded at Stax. Steve Cropper is a writing dude on that. Marvin Gaye on Tamla. And it's sort of a lesser known Marvin Gaye, so I picked it up. 1967, it's got the cutout hole. The Jackson 5, I always collect them. They lived about 15 minutes from here. So I am collecting everything by the Jackson 5. You don't see a lot of Steely Dan on 45, but when you do, you pick it up because Peg, I remember this album as clear as day. It came out in 77. I was in high school. Peg was the big one. So anything by Steely Dan on really wasn't their format. They were an LP, but boy, that was a great single. Earth, Wind, and Fire. In reading this book, I found out that Maurice White from Earth, Wind, and Fire is a Memphis guy. And does that strike you as being odd? Of course not. The horns in Earth, Wind, and Fire could have been right out of Memphis, and they probably were, a lot of those guys. September, everybody knows it, right? And that's the big hit. It came out in, what, 77, 78, somewhere in there? Okay. Fleetwood Mac, you got to pick them up because they're having a huge resurgence. I remember both of these songs off of the big album that went mega platinum. So Rumors, it was called. You Make Lovin' Fun. And I love it because Christy McVie sang that one. And she's got such a sweet, mellow voice. But I always thought that was her best song. Brenda and the Tabulations. And I'm hoping this is a Northern Soul. I'll have to look it up. But on DN Records, look at that. Dry Your Eyes. And I'm like, yeah, that's got to be something good. It's an obscure-looking label, too. Ooh Child. I always pick it up. I've got at least 10 copies of this. But I would say that's a very good. It's got a couple scratches on it. Arthur Conley, Funky Street. But what's the B-side? Is it? Oh, no, it's not. This big one, I forget the name of it. But Atco was, once again, Atlantic Records subsidiary. And they actually are a pretty good label. They got a lot of good soul on it. Chess Records, Nick Noble. I don't know what it is, but I picked it up because I'm on sort of a chess kick too. I always pick up Verb. I've got this Kai Winding, I think his name is, but he's sort of a jazzy, obscure dude, but I like his stuff. And the Viscount Harlem Nocturne. You always see this in old instrumental compilations, and you'll know it if you hear it. It's been in a million movies. I told you I like Cannonball. So good looking, very good, maybe very good plus. Cannonball Adderley. And Dane Stinnett. I don't think it's going to have Elvis type value, but it's a Sun record. It's clean. It's probably a very good plus. And Stax, a subsidiary Volt, and the Emotions. They were in the later period of Stax, where they sort of changed their logos and modified everything to look a little more modern. Post 1967, you had some changes in the ownership. This is pretty beat up. I mean, it might be a good plus, but it was owned by somebody named Herman Cornelius in Whiting, Indiana, according to that sticker. But Illinois Jacquette. My dad used to listen to him. And if you remember, Argo, which you can't see because of the label, was the Chess Record sort of jazz label. So whenever you get a chance to get something on a jazz label, pick it up. American Breed on Atka, not to be confused with Atco. So I picked that up. What the heck? And O.W. Wright. Starting to see his names pop up, some of the soul stuff. So I picked that up. All for $20, so you can't beat that. Now, I told you I don't waste time with albums. Oh, yes, I do. When I find an original Beach Boys, let's get a little better view on that, a little wide angle. This is a great original for $6, $7 I paid for it. And definitely I'm going to pick that up. And if you see this one, they're still wearing the original Beach Boys shirt. I've done an episode in one of these shirts. Pendleton makes it, and it's a Beach Boys reissue of the original shirt. And you're like, who are these guys? Well, that would be Brian Wilson. That would be Carl Wilson. That would be Dennis Wilson. That's Mike Love. But who is this? Oh, that's the friend down the street, David Marks. He wasn't in the band for long, but he still tours with them on occasion. But this is an original, and it was in pretty good shape. So I'm like, maybe not. I'm going to give it a good plus. But I just wanted to add it to my collection. And for $6, I did that. I got it more for the cover and the original sleeve and the artwork than anything else. Now, here's the reissue, and this is on Panorama. And why do I like that? Because included with it was a 7-inch green vinyl single of Luau with Judy. So that's pretty cool. And you can see how the artwork on the back is different. Here's the original, and then here's the Panorama. Okay, with a different, but look at how young these guys are. And they were originally the Pendletons, hence the shirt, and that was sort of a surfer or board shirt. But they changed their names, I don't even think with their consent. And David Marks is probably about 12 or 13 years old right there. But there's Brian Wilson. And ironically, Brian is the only Wilson brother still alive at the time I'm taping this. Mike Love's still alive, still out there. Dennis has passed. And Carl has passed too. But David Marks is still alive. I think he was born in 48. So there you go. Great little history. American kids trying to pick up and learn that thing called rock and roll. So yeah, I'm going to pick that up as it's a piece of Americana more than anything else. All right, so there you go. Valpo Vintage right there on Lincoln Way in Valparaiso, Indiana. A great place to get your antiques, but also to get some records. Here it is, the gem of the week. None other than Dane Stinnett. It's called Don't Knock What You Don't Understand. You've got Elvis, you've got Jerry Lee Lewis, you got Carl Perkins, you got Roy Orbison, you got Charlie Rich, but have you ever heard of Dane Stinnett? Well, either had I, but this is such an iconic label that it just jumped out at me. And look at the condition on that, very good plus. So whenever you see Sun, you pick it up. It could be a reprint, but it could be an original. This baby's got a $15 median value. And remember, I only paid $20. And oh, by the way, that was $20 for everything. That Beach Boys album, turns out it was an original mono, $18 median value, $69 high value. So RockMine's all about finding the great, iconic rock and roll, blues, jazz, and soul every Friday at noon. Click that subscribe button, and we'll see you next week.